When her son suffered a seizure at school, she had nothing, but an incredible change was revealed. Sarah's breath hitched as she heard the words blaring through the cheap flip phone pressed against her ear. Ethan's had a seizure during gym class. The world around her spun dangerously as panic gripped her chest. She had nothing but a flickering hope crammed into cramped quarters of their apartment, and an income that barely pushed them through bills. Racing down the shabby streets, the weight of reality crashed in waves. Their dreams, little drawings crafted by Ethan's 10-year-old hands, plastered onto the peeling walls, seemed to mock her desperation. Just last night, she'd poured her change onto the diner table, imagining every coin morphing into a wish, praying for just one more tip to hold their fragile world in place. Each delayed bill was a looming specter, threatening to sever their connection to the internet, the lifeline keeping Ethan engaged with schoolwork and his beloved online games. As she turned a tight corner, her heart raced, not just out of fear, but from a dark, gnawing uncertainty about their future. When she lunged into the sterile, fluorescent-lit realm of the nurse's office, the fury inside her curled beneath layers of concern. There was Ethan, pale yet still holding on to that admirable spark, eyes fierce with curiosity, wondering aloud why he couldn't play football now. Cradling him against her, Sara felt tension melting momentarily, but then weighed down by reality, the relentless bills, and the harrowing unknown. Marlene, the kind nurse, spoke softly, recognizing Ethan's potential. Everyone else seemed blind to it. A degree of conviction lit her eyes, offering a flicker of hope. In that instant, Sara felt her own heart shift. Could he really brush against the confines of possibility? Weeks slipped by like grains of sand, each doctor's appointment unveiling a system that felt complacent about Ethan's struggles. When the school counselor delivered the evaluation with cold detachment, announcing Ethan's perceived limitations, despair threaded through Sara like freezing fingers. Each diagnosis weighed heavy on her heart, and a fire ignited within. Why couldn't they see her son's brilliance? Why were they content with mere labels? The disbelief curling in her chest grew into a surge of confrontational defiance. Desperation propelled her to organize a meeting with other concerned parents. She could no longer remain silent. She stood at that gathering, feeling vulnerable yet emboldened as she prepared to channel her fears and struggles into something powerful. But as she opened her mouth to speak, the memories of sleepless nights and late-night budgeting broke her resolve like a fragile thread. And there, in the audience, was Ethan, anxiety twisting his cap, eyes wide with admiration, as if she were his hero. That sight filled her with renewed determination, steadying her voice against the swell of doubt. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. She recounted the unvarnished truths that clung to her life, the brutal grind of struggling, the expectations unmet, the walls that seemed to box her son in. The air grew thick, charged with shared heartaches and unfed potential. But just when it appeared she might reach the others, a dismissive response from the principal resonated in her ears, slicing through the moment like a knife. Fury and heartbreak collided as she stood on the precipice, the fight spiraling into something uncertain. Could she truly push against a system that felt more intent on holding them down than supporting them? As she met Ethan's eyes, determination flickering in her chest, she grasped that this was not just about her son. It was a daunting battle against an unyielding force, and just like that, the stakes had never been higher. Would she rise from the ashes of this anguish, or crumble beneath its weight? The answer loomed just beyond reach, tangled up in a web of self-doubt and fierce love. The days that followed were steeped in determination. With every whispered doubt, Sara felt her anxiety morphing into a fierce resolve. The meeting with the parents stirred something within her, igniting a spark that hadn't burned this brightly in years. She wasn't just a struggling single mother at the mercy of a system. She was a protector, a voice ready to shatter barriers that stifled Ethan's brilliance. Each morning, she found herself typing feverishly on her laptop, channels of advocacy unraveling in her mind. She sought out every online resource, every blog documenting success stories that mirrored her plight. Not only was she grasping at fragments of hope, but she was also formulating a plan that fed off the threads of fear woven through her heart. That flickering flame she'd sensed in Ethan now burned steadily inside her. Sara began reaching out to specialists, educators who had turned their own battles into personal missions. Her first success came when she connected with Ken, a local education consultant who had carved a niche in advocating for children with special needs. Their first meeting unfolded in a tiny cafe filled with rich aromas and laughter. Sitting across from him, Sara felt the weight of judgment and misunderstanding evaporate. Ken listened intently as she detailed Ethan's struggles and triumphs, each word like fuel on her quest for justice. "You're not just advocating for Ethan," he said, his voice steady and warm. "You're illuminating a path for so many others. Let's turn your passion into action." His words rang in her mind, challenging her to elevate her fight from survival mode to a quest for empowerment. This was beyond them. It could become a mission to redefine perceptions. As weeks turned into months, Sara immersed herself in advocacy work, wielding information like armor. She drafted letters and proposals for special educational resources and sought out testimonies from other parents facing similar struggles. The once daunting school board meetings transformed into canvases for her burgeoning confidence. At each assembly, she stood tall, articulating the myriad faces of disability, faces that had been hidden behind labels of inadequacy. Her relationship with Ethan deepened as well. He became her sounding board, brightening when she shared snippets of the upcoming discussions at school. She crafted nights filled with laughter, where conversations sprawled into dreams of his future, being a famous game designer, an astronaut, or simply his true self. Each dream he spun only intensified her commitment to not let the system dictate his narrative. One afternoon, while at the local library, Sara met Laura, a mother whose son faced similar educational barriers. Their initial light banter transformed into an impassioned discussion over coffee. Laura's son, much like Ethan, had been misjudged by the education system. The two clicked instantly, weaving their stories together amid laughter and shared frustrations. Within that hour, as ideas exchanged like precious currency, they dared to dream of a support network. As Sara plunged into her new reality, doubts remained. What if she failed? The self-doubt loomed like a shadow, ready to ensnare her goodness. Driven by the urgency to address her fears constructively, Sara started drafting a community presentation that highlighted misconceptions about learning disabilities. Perhaps it was time to invite the school board into an open dialogue, to illuminate not only Ethan's potential, but also the strengths of numerous children they overlooked. The challenge loomed like a mountain to scale. But standing in front of a community hanging on her words, she realized this wasn't merely a fight for Ethan. This was about transforming a narrative, reshaping perceptions, and, most importantly, empowering every child who dared to dream. As she tightened her resolve, one question loomed larger than the rest. Would the school board be willing to listen, or would she face another wave of dismissive hostility? The moment for confrontation was drawing nearer, and with it came a tension that mingled with both fear and fervor. Would they recognize the strength in the voices they had sought to silence? Sara stood before the mirror, her breath steadying as she practiced her speech again. The reflection stared back. It was a face marked by determination, yet streaked with uncertainty. This was it. Her debut before the school board loomed like a tightrope walk over an abyss of doubt. She had researched meticulously, her notes littered with personal anecdotes, statistics, and studies that spotlighted competency within disability. However, Her heart thumped with the fear of dismissal. Ethan's recent seizure at school played on endless replay in her mind, an alarm that resonated through her purpose. The memory felt like a weight she couldn't shake. The helplessness of seeing him struggle, the looks of concern from educators lingering in the hallway. The incident became a catalyst, igniting a passion within her that had remained dormant, yearning for expression. No longer could she be relegated to the sidelines, her voice muffled. As she stepped into the meeting room, Sara noted the attentive gazes of board members, but also the skepticism lurking beneath polite smiles. She took a deep breath, finding anchor in the resilience she had cultivated. Ignoring the skepticism, she launched into her presentation. Each word was crafted with intention, weaving the struggles she, Ethan, and countless others faced. "Imagine," she urged, locking eyes with a board member who fidgeted. "A classroom where every child's uniqueness is celebrated, not judged. A space where we empower the shining potential within every student, including those who struggle with learning differences." As she spoke, she felt the weight gradually shift from her shoulders. The transformation was palpable, as if lighting the room brighter with each sentence. The quiet murmurs of support from parents in attendance fueled her drive. This was not just her journey, but theirs. But as the minutes unfolded, so did a familiar doubt. Not all board members appeared receptive. One gentleman, Mr. Collins, a veteran board member known for dismissive tendencies, furrowed his brow. "But Ms. Hargrove, are you suggesting that we overhaul the entire educational system based on the few?" His tone dripped with condescension, a stark reminder of the battles yet to be faced. A flush crept up her neck. Did he not see the larger picture? Did he think she desired undue favors for her son? She questioned whether to counter his skepticism or pivot to a strategy of diplomacy. Inside, Sara wrestled with the urge to recoil. This moment could define everything, for not just her child but all children labeled as misfit. With resolve solidifying within her, she met his gaze head-on, refusing to shrink back. "It's not about overhauling everything, Mr. Collins. It's about inclusive practices that cultivate resilience and growth for all students, regardless of their challenges. Each child has rights and potential that deserve recognition." Her heart raced. She hadn't anticipated striking a pitched confrontation this early in her quest. Still, she felt emboldened. These challenges were necessary for change. The evening wore on, and as she finished, a new hope flickered. A spark of interest had ignited in a few faces, even if they were overshadowed by skepticism. She could sense a shift, however vague. It might have been tiny, perhaps imperceptible, but the possibilities surged. As she wrapped up with an invitation for collaboration and further dialogue, a single thought anchored her nerves. This dialogue had been started, and it would not die with a single meeting. But as she exited the room, buoyed by her courage, yet haunted by Colin's disdainful expression, the uncertainty lingered. Had she struck the right balance? Had she truly reached them? The critical moment rested not on her words alone, but on changes they chose to embrace. What if they resisted her call to action? As she stepped into the cool night air, the echoes of her presentation faded, replaced by the gnawing realization. This was merely the beginning. Had she unwittingly awakened a fierce adversary in Collins? She had taken a step forward, but the real confrontation awaited, ready to challenge not just systemic attitudes, but her very resolve. Sara paced along the dimly lit street, each footfall echoing her fragmented thoughts. The cool air cut sharply through her resolve, causing her mind to spiral over the implications of her confrontation with Mr. Collins. Had she breached a boundary she was ill-prepared to traverse? The chill wasn't just external. It seeped deep, gnawing at her confidence, binding her heart in knots of unease. That night, as sleep eluded her, Sara found herself entrenched in the complexities of her new mission. Each hour that passed was punctuated by doubts. What if the board members dismissed her proposal altogether? What if the skepticism she sensed from Collins multiplied? Could she withstand the political quagmire awash with vested interests? Morning arrived, its light spilling through the blinds, illuminating the desktop littered with her presentation notes. The statistics she'd gathered now seemed mere numbers, devoid of the passion she'd intertwined with them. In a stark contrast to last night's adrenaline, her motivation felt perilously thin, as though it could be whisked away like fog on a sunny day. Driven by a sense of urgency, she took Lisa's advice. Reaching out to other parents, their hopes intertwined with hers formed a lifeline. They began meeting weekly, gathering to exchange stories, strategize, and bolster each other's resolve. This communal support wrapped around Sara like a safety net, pulling her toward promising possibilities and buoying her spirits. Each shared experience illuminated the collective plight, providing not just empathy but actionable insights. One afternoon, they sat at the local library. A modest space buzzed with the soft rustle of turning pages. "What if we compiled our stories?" Lisa, an articulate mother of a son with dyslexia, suggested. "Share our personal experiences with specific examples, focus on the humanity behind the statistics?" The weight of that suggestion unfolded a new dimension. It wasn't merely about policies or practices, but about raw human experiences. This narrative could bridge the divide Collins had built around institutional logic. Taking the lead, Sara tapped into her writing skills. Long forgotten amidst the chaos of raising a child with special needs and navigating everyday life. As words flowed onto the page, she felt an awakening. This was the power of storytelling, a subtle yet firm tool capable of breaking barriers. Collectively, the parents poured their fears and triumphs into the written word, weaving together a vibrant tapestry of resilience. One evening, buoyed by a sense of newfound purpose, Sara gathered the group for a meeting at her house. Amidst the aroma of coffee brewing and the tension in the air, she shared the draft they had crafted. Tears glistened in many eyes as their truths resonated deeply within. "Together," she said, her voice steady as she spoke, "we can show them that it's not about being a few. It's about a community striving for understanding and acknowledgement." The following week was set to be pivotal. The board was scheduled to review a petition accompanied by their shared stories. But as the date approached, she felt an unease rise again. They had articulated such raw honesty between each other. What if the board dismissed these narratives? Did they merely see the chaos of emotions as a lack of professionalism? The doubts dwindled, replaced by an unquenchable determination. Her confrontation with Collins had sparked a resilience deep within her. Over the next few days, Sara devoted herself to rehearsing the findings of both their stories and statistical evidence that directly countered the fear Collins exhibited. However, the deeper she delved, the sharper the realization struck. This wasn't solely about advocating for inclusive practices, but about reforming attitudes. The awareness of that narrow line danced around her, taunting her with the potential backlash. How would they respond? Would they see her group as a threat or a mere inconvenience? With the board meeting approaching, Sara felt the weight of the world on her shoulders. The brush of uncertainty against her spine served only to sharpen her focus. This moment would either shatter her ambitions or catalyze the change she sought. She took a breath, her resolve cementing. The time had come to not merely face the board, but to confront every latent doubt she had about herself and her capabilities as an advocate for change. How far will I go to ensure that my son, and every other child, gets the recognition they deserve? She pondered, aware that she was not only confronting the board, but also the very limits of her own courage and determination. The stakes felt higher than ever, and as she steered her thoughts toward the coming confrontation, it became clear that neither the board members nor her personal battles would relent quietly. In those moments of vulnerability, something shifted within her. A fierce clarity was born. The path ahead was fraught with obstacles, but she was ready to embrace the struggle. As the clock ticked away the final hours before the meeting, one thought loomed larger than any other. The true test was just beginning. The morning of the board meeting cast an uneasy shadow over Sara. She sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by an avalanche of notes and printed testimonials from other parents. Each piece of paper bore the weight of truth, a physical manifestation of their shared struggle. And yet, as she stared at the clutter, the thought of presenting this narrative felt insurmountable. What if they belittled the genuine stories? What if they revisited the same old rhetoric that had kept children like her son locked in a shadow of misunderstanding? Sara gripped her coffee cup until her knuckles turned white, wrestling with the anxiety clawing at her insides. It was time to leave. She had urged her group to take the day off work and dedicate this moment to the fight for their children's rights. Yet, the belly of doubt stirred within her, leaving her questioning whether she was the right vessel for this responsibility. On the way to the meeting, she replayed the rehearsed phrases in her mind, desperately searching for that spark of conviction she had cultivated with the other parents. Her son's bright smile surfaced, comforting yet bittersweet. Would they fully understand the value of each child's uniqueness? As she stepped into the boardroom, cold air rushed over her skin, amplifying her apprehensions. The room was stark, the table set like a frontier, separating her from those in power. Board members, faces indifferent and expectant, sat ready to dissect proposals and evaluate potential change like corporate robots. Taking a deep breath, Sara felt a voice within her whispering urgency. "This is it," it said. "They need to hear you." She squared her shoulders and approached the front. The sea of polished shoes and serious expressions felt daunting, but also familiar. Each parent had lent her their truth. This was not just her moment, it was theirs too. She began her presentation, weaving the narratives together, focused on the empathy behind the statistics. As she spoke, the room's silence felt like a living entity, nudging, pressing, reacting. The more she shared, the more she realized she was shedding layers of fear. Her words catalyzed emotions she had been hesitant to reveal even to herself. She tapped into a profound well of vulnerability, transforming trepidation into purpose. But then it happened. A soft murmur among the board members, faces turning slightly, a discomfort breaching the facade of professionalism. Collins leaned forward, arms crossed, his shadow cast over the proceedings. "Ms. Marshall, are you suggesting that anecdotes should govern our educational policies?" he challenged, eyes piercing sharper than she anticipated. The room sucked in air. Sara's heart raced. How had she not prepared for this? Doubt swirled anew as she grappled with the realization that the very elements that empowered her were now under scrutiny. But as she steadied herself, another instinct rose to the surface, assertiveness buried under layers of compliance. "Yes, Mr. Collins. I am suggesting that personal narratives are just as valid as empirical data. These are lives we're discussing. Each statistic stands for a child and their struggle, their triumph, their existence." The board shifted slightly at her retort. This was no longer merely a proposal. It was a challenge. As Sara locked eyes with Collins, a flicker of understanding passed between them, weighty and palpable. This confrontation sharpened her nerves, revealing a strength that had lain dormant until now. Suddenly, the fear that had once paralyzed her morphed into a commitment, a visceral need to ensure the room heard those who were often silenced. Together, the stories illustrate potential, growth, and resilience. She pushed on, finding momentum. The energy shifted as she spoke from the heart, bypassing logic to confront the humanity behind each child's journey. After her presentation, Collins scribbled notes but did not engage her further. The board remained uncertain, but they began debating her arguments among themselves. There was a flicker of something in the air, the tension intermingled with a strange sense of possibilities. As she concluded, her last words hung in the air, a challenge to see beyond their current policies and to embrace a more empathetic approach. Sitting back down, Sara felt the weight of the room change, but as she exhaled, she couldn't shake the feeling that the board's decision still loomed like an unseen specter. Was this breakthrough truly the beginning of transformation, or merely a hard-fought encounter destined to falter? The moment she had dared to claim her voice, she felt invincible. But what if it hadn't been enough? As her heart raced with uncertainty about the outcome, she reminded herself that her fight wasn't just for a policy change, it was for recognition of her son's potential. And as the board deliberations commenced, one thought gripped her mind. Was battling institutional inertia merely the first act in a larger struggle? The board members' murmurs and shifting glances formed a chaotic backdrop as Sara clenched her hands in her lap, intertwining her fingers tightly enough to feel the pulse in her palms. What had felt like an intimate sharing of stories now took on the weight of a transactional debate. Her heart throbbed in sync with her thoughts, questions crashing against one another like waves on a rocky shore. Would her raw honesty translate into meaningful change, or would it dissolve in the face of indifference? As the minutes ticked by, Sara's instincts twitched with both anticipation and dread. She analyzed their expressions, searching for clues, the subtle raises of eyebrows, the flickers of doubt dancing across otherwise stoic faces. Though their deliberations were meant to be behind closed doors, she felt the fissures of hope merging with the chasms of fear. Then, Collins broke the heavy silence. I think Ms. Marshall raises some interesting points. Yet we must consider the implications of policy changes that are more emotional than analytical, he stated, his voice hanging in the air like a block of granite. A wave of tension rolled through the room, and Sara's heart sank. It was as if he had declared war on her very rationale. But a newfound clarity ignited within Sara. She stood, though her body ached with uncertainty. Mr. Collins, perhaps the essence of policy should include the emotional truths of those it affects. Our children aren't just numbers. They have stories and experiences that reveal the genesis of real issues. Ignoring that is tantamount to closing our eyes to their needs. Her voice steadied as she anchored herself once again in the collective strength of the parents. Though she expected criticism to roll back in waves, she was met with silence, the air thick and taut between her declaration and the board's response. The momentum was shifting, and she felt the slow churn of uncertainty morph into something brighter. Resolve. Let's not forget, she continued, buoyed by her own conviction. What you deem logical is often dictated by what you choose to overlook. Embracing empathy can lend a depth to our policies that raw statistics never will. It was a bold play, yet one she sensed was crucial. Collins flashed a brief look of annoyance, but she could see the cogwheels turning in his mind. The discussion ignited like dry tinder. Board members leaned in, voices merging and diverging, fraught with the complexities of Sara's message. While some continued to defend the traditional methods of evaluation, others began to echo sentiments rooted in empathy and recognition. What had felt like a solitary fight began to resemble a collective conversation, albeit nascent. As debates crystallized, a spark of self-awareness ignited a furnace of confidence within her. She realized that the process was not merely about achieving policy change today. It was about fostering enduring conversations that could allow for growth and understanding in the long run. Stepping back, she took a breath, the weight of the room beginning to shift one last time. Every inch she had already traversed filled her with a fierce determination to press on, knowing that the power of her voice could spur an awakening, even if it didn't manifest instantaneously. After what felt like hours, the board concluded their discussions. Collins announced they would take time to reflect before reaching a decision, a moment that felt simultaneously like a reprieve and a summons to battle once again. As the board members filed out, the collective hum of conversation faded into the echo of Sara's racing thoughts. What lay ahead still felt unsteady, a fragile web suspended between disbelief and hope. Would she truly manage to influence a structure so deeply entrenched in tradition? Then it struck her, a moment of realization crystallizing in her mind. She had emerged from her shell, not just as a parent, but as an advocate. There was no turning back now. The groundwork had been laid. But as she gathered her papers, the nagging sense of what was yet to come lingered in the air, pressing down like a weight. She couldn't shake the feeling that a significant trial awaited her next, one that could redefine her resolve and commitment entirely. What would she do when the true challenge emerged from the shadows, crashing down on her unprepared? Sara walked out of the boardroom with a mixture of pride and trepidation thudding in her chest. The sharp contrast of fluorescent lights against the deepening shadows of evening weighed on her as she stepped into the parking lot. She had made her points. She had stoked a dialogue. But the impending decision hung in the air, a specter looming over her newfound resolve. As she drove home, the hum of the engine masked the turmoil in her mind. A memory flashed. She had been terrified the first time she spoke at a PTA meeting, her voice wobbly and small. Fear had gripped her then, but tonight was different. There was strength in her voice now, an unexpected confidence pulsing through each syllable. But was it enough? What awaited her at home? A tight-knit group of supportive parents, or critical voices that echoed her own doubts? She closed her eyes at a red light, envisioning her son's smiling face. It anchored her, a reminder of why she had ventured onto this uncertain path in the first place. The thought of his innocence, his trust, fueled her determination further. Upon arriving, Sara was met with a cacophony of sounds. Her son's laughter and the dog's barking mingled in the warm embrace of home. Yet, within that comfort lay an unsettling truth she couldn't ignore. Would she be strong enough to fight for him and others like him, especially when the stakes became personal? The following day sprang forth startlingly bright. Each moment felt laden with potential, yet Sara could not shake the residue of anxiety lingering from the board meeting. With each task she undertook, from brewing coffee to packing lunches, the questions in her mind began to swirl like the steam rising in the morning air. What would she do when the very lives entangled with her advocacy were threatened? Then it happened. She received a call from her son's school that froze her blood. As she listened to the nurse's voice relay the sequence of events leading to her son suffering a seizure at the playground, she felt a searing heat bloom across her chest. The comfort of home she had felt moments earlier shattered, leaving only the stark reality of panic and dread. She raced to the school, adrenaline flooding her system. Each red light felt like a ticking clock, the impending outcome of this situation unraveling in real time. The nurse informed her that he had recovered, but the terror of having witnessed such a deeply personal moment from the viewpoint of policy made her feel unmoored and raw. The children her advocacy aimed to protect weren't just abstract figures. They were flesh and blood, and now one of the most important ones to her was at risk. As she entered the nurse's office, the sight of her son, pale yet resting, filled her with anger and fear. Fear for his safety, and for the future of children in similar circumstances. This visceral experience ignited something deep within her, a fire forged from love and defiance. No longer was her mission a mere duty. It had transformed into an unwavering commitment, carved from the urgency of the moment. In the quiet that followed his recovery, as he clung to her for comfort, Sara murmured promises, not just to him, but to herself. She would ensure their voices were heard. She would be their advocate not just in meetings or discussions, but in real and tangible ways, confronting the institutional barriers that endangered their well-being. Her resolve solidified in the stark reality of motherhood. She realized that the soft power of empathy must now merge with fierce advocacy. The journey would be a battle. The true test of her character loomed large, a confrontation with the very systems she sought to challenge. What if those who completely disagreed with her perspectives came for her, questioning her motives and decisions? The time had come to face those who viewed her as just a mother and not a force of change. She took a deep breath, readying herself for what lay ahead. It was time to harness her newfound voice, to challenge everyone, starting with Collins. Both mentally and emotionally prepared for battle, she whispered to her son, "We'll make this right." But in the echoing silence of that promise, a knot of uncertainty tightened within her. What if she wasn't strong enough? The air was thick with anticipation that morning, a charged silence that wrapped around Sara as she prepared for the meeting that loomed ahead. She had drafted a speech, or more accurately, a manifesto of transformation, in hopes of guiding others to understand her journey. But the specter of Collins still hovered over her, casting shadows over her resolve. As she looked in the mirror, the reflection revealed a pair of eyes brightened by fierce determination but tinged with apprehension. Would they see her as capable? Would they listen when she confronted the established order, a single voice rising against institutional inertia? She shook her head as if to clear the accumulating doubts, willing her anxiety to transform into strength. Arriving at the school, she felt the familiar ebb and flow of parental energy mingling with the sound of children's laughter. Yet today, the joy felt threaded with tension, as if everyone sensed an impending storm. The hallways felt constricting, and she glimpsed parents talking in hushed tones, their eyes casting sideways, gauging her intentions. At the meeting, a wave of familiar faces welcomed her. But within those expressions, she recognized discontent and skepticism, a clash of where she stood now versus where they had always placed her. Collins spoke first, his voice resonating like thunder. We must not let a single event cloud our judgment. Our policies have been effective, and we need to focus on consistency. Sara clenched her fists, feeling the weight of absolute certainty intertwining with a rising panic. You mean effectiveness for whom? She interjected, her voice startling not only herself, but those within earshot. The silence that followed was deafening. I'm here to tell you that this is not just a policy debate. It's personal. My son. He is among those sidelined by so-called effective measures. The room shifted. She could see the gears turning in the heads of those gathered, wondering who she had become. The vulnerability of sharing her son's harrowing experience came crashing against the wall of perceived authority. Each word clawed at the layers of reluctant acceptance and pushed against its boundaries. She refused to remain just a figure of maternal concern. Today, I demand that we prioritize empathy. It must guide our policies and practices. We cannot allow fear of change to dictate our actions. We must evolve, she declared, her heart thudding as she embraced the truth of her statement. Facing Collins, she felt an unyielding challenge rise within her. He aligned himself with tradition, while she stood in a realm of personal upheaval, ready to disrupt the status quo. Change is necessary, she asserted. And if we're to protect our children, my child, we must consider the whole picture, not just the data. The room murmured. Encouragement flickered from a few known allies, yet others narrowed their eyes, unconvinced. Would they push back? Or might her passion ignite a spark within their entrenched beliefs? Every instinct in her pushed to flatten the presumed hierarchy, to turn the gaze back onto them with unyielding scrutiny. After the meeting, Sara felt raw, but alive. Her confrontation with Collins had rebirthed a sense of agency she hadn't fully grasped before. Discomfort flickered within familiar circles, a recognition of her evolution. It wasn't only her son's condition, it was every child pushed to the margins. She resolved to understand not just the mechanics of advocacy, but the emotional landscapes intertwined with her cause. That evening, while sitting with her son at the dinner table, she decided to share her experiences from her day, not with fear, but with hope. Her story could sow seeds of understanding and empathy. As their laughter filled the space, she realized the battle was not just against institutional apathy, but against the inner doubts that threatened to overshadow her determination. The day had brought forth revelations, but as sleep beckoned, an unsettling question emerged with clarity. What other battles would she have to face, not just in the boardroom, but in her quest to garner allies? And would they be willing to fight alongside her, or against her? The night surged with uncertainty, the future hanging, just out of reach. The morning sun broke through the haze of uncertainty that had clung to Sara since the day before. Her confrontation with Collins lingered in her mind, a mixture of exhilaration and dread. As she sipped her coffee, She felt the adrenaline from the meeting coursing through her veins, igniting a determination that pushed aside the lingering doubt. She knew that today would not merely be a day of recovery. It would be another step down a path she had only begun to illuminate. Head held high, she made her way to the school, her heart pounding with expectations and a renewed purpose. Today, she intended to focus on establishing connections, rallying support, and transforming her vision into actionable objectives. She found herself contemplating her next moves. Which parents could be persuaded to join her cause? How could she present the data in an engaging manner that would stir empathetic responses instead of indifference? Upon entering the building, she was immediately met with the usual cascade of chatter and laughter. Yet the atmosphere felt different. The parents exchanged knowing glances as they recognized her presence, their expressions a blend of intrigue and wariness. It was clear that her boldness had sparked conversations beyond those walls, and she was determined to harness that energy. Sara sought out a few of her allies, parents who had stood alongside her at the meeting, expressing shared discontent, but lacking the courage to speak up. "Can we meet?" she asked each of them, her voice steady and deliberate. "I'd like us to discuss our experiences and see where we can go from here." One by one, they agreed. She felt the weight of responsibility pressing upon her, but she also felt empowered. These meetings weren't just about exchanging complaints. They were opportunities to strategize and outline actionable steps to influence policy change. Perhaps this cluster of parents could advocate together, combining their voices to amplify the impact of their individual stories. Later that day, they convened in her living room, a modest space that held the promise of transformation. Over cups of herbal tea, they began sharing their stories, their fears, and their hopes. Sara listened intently, recognizing patterns of inequity and suffering that linked their experiences. As she took notes, a brilliant idea blossomed. They could create a community voice, a platform that empowered them all, while also engaging with broader issues. "We have to be systematic," Sara urged, "and start organizing our data. This isn't just about our children. It's about changing the system itself." Her words struck chords, sparking animated discussion around collecting narratives, preparing presentations, and drafting proposals. They agreed to meet regularly, creating a coalition rooted in shared personal and familial experiences. However, as the day progressed, a shadow began to creep back in. The fear of backlash loomed large. Would those who had once underestimated her seek to dismantle this growing alliance? Would Collins retaliate against her efforts? As the laughter faded and the discussions became more serious, the apprehensions surfaced. Sara wrestled with the thought. Her passion now had the power to both uplift and alienate. In that moment, she had an epiphany. It was essential to demonstrate not just vulnerability, but bravery in the face of adversity. If she was to lead, she would need to confront not just the system, but the emotions attached to it: fear, anger, sorrow. She made a mental note. She would craft a strategy that was not merely about numbers, but about profound human connection and genuine narratives. As the day wound down, Sara found herself reflecting on her evolution. Each conversation had woven a thread into a tapestry of possibility, but she still felt the gnawing anxiety of navigating the system's response. Her resolve fortified, she planned to invite another challenging conversation with Collins, to lay bare the fears she had seen and experienced firsthand. But the question lingered and morphed into a tangible sense of urgency. Would her voice lead to collaboration or further conflict in the boardroom? The walls of certainty began closing in once more, and she prepared herself for whatever lay ahead. The day of the coalition meeting arrived, and the air buzzed with anticipation. Sara stood in front of a small group of parents, whose lives had mirrored her own in countless ways, each story a testament to resilience against systemic challenges. They had gathered in her living room, transformed into a war room of sorts, where determination coursed through their discussions like electricity. Each parent recounted their battles, their children's struggles, the dismissive remarks from teachers, and the constant fight for acknowledgement. This unity became a soft surge of collective power, mingling grief and purpose within the cozy walls of her home. Sara encouraged each story shared, weaving emotional connections and reflecting on the actual experiences echoed in every detail. As the sun dipped below the horizon, creating a warm golden glow in her living room, inspiration struck. We need to document all these stories, illuminate our individual experiences, and present them as a unified front, she proposed. In that moment, a fire ignited within her. They could not just advocate for change, they would frame it through the shared lens of humanity. By the end of the evening, a strategy had taken shape. Sara and the parents aimed to compile a comprehensive report detailing their experiences, accompanied by statistical evidence demonstrating the inadequacies of the current educational practices for children with special needs. Over the weeks, they committed to gathering testimonials, organizing interviews with relevant specialists, and crafting their narratives into a powerful document that would demand attention. At the heart of each plan, Sara sensed her growing confidence. She had evolved from a mother desperate for change into a facilitator of hope, a leader committed to reshaping perceptions. Each meeting pushed her further away from the shadows of self-doubt. She wasn't just advocating for Ethan anymore. Her mission had expanded, encompassing the welfare of all children marginalized by rigid educational frameworks. Facing Collins once again felt like an impending storm. Sara's heart raced as the day approached. Would he see the collective power they had created or reject their voices outright? But the time for fear had passed. She had transformed her anxiety into action, her resolve turning into unyielding confidence as she prepared their presentation. The day of the board meeting arrived, and the room was filled with board members engaging in preliminary discussions. The stakes felt high. The energy in the room crackled. As Sara entered, the eyes of her fellow parents met hers, a silent pact signaling they were in this together. She felt buoyed by their support. When it was her turn to speak, she stepped forward with a solid resolve, presenting the coalition's findings. Each parent's voice resonated through her, weaving emotions and statistics seamlessly as she articulated the significance of their experiences. Our children possess incredible potential, and this report showcases that potential alongside the struggles they face, she declared, embodying every ounce of strength she had gathered over the weeks. As Sara navigated through the proposal, the room shifted. She stood firm when Collins began to interject, challenging her arguments. But instead of crumbling, she met his interruptions openly and calmly, armed with statistics and human stories reflecting the urgent need for change. It isn't about undermining the established system, Mr. Collins. It's about evolving it to embrace all learners, she said, her voice unwavering. The board members leaned in, some nodding thoughtfully, as her confidence rippled through the room. The hesitance woven into the atmosphere started to dissipate, replaced by a feeling of possibility. Conversations sparked among board members about the need for educational reforms that centered empathy and inclusivity, rather than the status quo. At the meeting's close, members voted to consider further discussions about implementing new policies based on the coalition's proposals, a vital first step toward change. Sara left the boardroom, her heart light with the weight of possibility. She had achieved personal transformation, and in the process, she had forged a path for others to follow, a tangible legacy of progress and advocacy. Each step alongside her son had been a lesson in resilience, underscoring the importance of amplifying the voices that often go unheard. As she exited the school building, a warmth enveloped her. Sara felt solid confidence in her abilities as an advocate, surrounded by allies forged in unity. She had conquered her fears and rewritten the narrative surrounding learning disabilities within her community. The journey had just begun, but today, she had proven to both herself and to others that her fight mattered. With her son by her side, she had become not only his protector, but a champion for countless children. The moment felt victorious, one she had long dreamed of, a realization of purpose. Now, more than ever, she knew one thing. the world would be different because her story had demanded to be heard. You need to subscribe now to our channel so you don't miss out on the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm and help us reach more people. Comment below with your reactions and theories about this ending, and share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. Don't wait even one more second to support our channel. Your engagement fuels these incredible journeys of personal overcoming.